Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our Right Live Q&A. I'm your host, Daniel Androutsos, plain language consultant and trainer with Right. And today with us, we've got two excellent members of our training staff, Hewitt and Friederike, who've both delivered more critical thinking workshops than I can count. Lovely to have you with us today. And please do drop your questions into the chat. We'll get through as many as we can. I'd love Claire and Friederike to introduce themselves and let us know why they're here. Claire?
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Claire. I have been at Right probably long enough to be considered vintage now, I think. And the Critical Thinking Workshop is one of a number of workshops that I deliver around communication. And I think it's fascinating to spend some time just thinking about how we think and interact with the world and how that affects our communication. Yeah, that's me.
Right, lovely to have you, Claire. And Friederike?
Kia ora koutou. My name is Rika. As you will hear, I have an accent. I'm from Germany, and I came to New Zealand to do a PhD. So my background is in academia. And yeah, I now am also, like Claire, a trainer here. And I'm really glad that I can take a lot of critical thinking and deep thinking into the work we do here as well.
Great to have you both with us today. So, right, let's get into it. Our bias. I'd actually like to start with my top three questions for you both, and you can go into as much little detail as you like. Firstly, am I really biased? Secondly, how do you know? And thirdly, why does it even matter? Clear?
Let's make sure we save up the next hard question for Rika. So, are we bias and how do we know? I think it's probably safe to assume we all have our biases. All of us are the sum of our lives and our experiences and our upbringing. So we're always going to see the world a certain way, and that'll be different to other people. And most of that will lead to us being able to make generalizations and assumptions of the world based on what we've seen and what's in our experience. So those can be biases. And was that your question? Why does it even matter?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where we're going in life, what we want to achieve and what we want to do with information. But certainly biases can cause us to overlook evidence that's in front of us or discount it or not give it enough weight. So if we're in decision-making roles, there is a real benefit to being able to recognize how biases might affect what we're doing, but also for all of us in roles around communication, recognizing that we have biases in the way we generate the information. Others will have biases in the way they read information. So just being aware of their role can help us achieve what we want to with the communications and be more sure that they get to the other side with the intent that we want.
Thank you very much. Rika, you got anything to add on that?
Give me the questions again. Are we really biased? I'll bring the sort of research side to it. And research would also say that we are all biased because that's just how our brain has evolved, right? We often need to make really fast decisions, and our brain is really good at that. And it needs to rely on mental shortcuts. You can't, you hear a noise in the forest, you can't make a pro-con list. Is this a bear or not? You need to make a fast decision. And that will often keep you safe. And of course, that can veer into sort of a darker side where we speak of biases, because if you're constantly thinking every noise is a problem and is a danger, then of course you can't live your life anymore. So mental shortcuts aren't inherently bad, but if they're sort of veering into really unhelpful biases, then that is not helpful. But overall, yes, regardless of how educated or smart you are, we are all biased. It's just something like, that's why you picked the title so well. You're biased, deal with it. We just have to find ways to handle it. That's how our brains work.
Right, so those mental shortcuts might sometimes be doing the right thing. If we're not checking them, that's when we end up with these.
Yeah, I would say so, right? I mean, it's good to be cautious, right? And to have a quick reaction to a dangerous sound. But if you have what we call a negativity bias and everything is always dangerous, you can't even live your life anymore. So then it becomes unhelpful.
Also, just reiterating what Rika said, it's important. Heuristics and mental shortcuts are not always bad. In fact, in most of our life, they're really good. We need to be able to filter a lot of information really quickly, make snap judgments. Rika's example is a bear in the forest. Mine's trying to find my car in a car park. you don't go through every single vehicle and think, well, that one's a van and it's white, so that's not that one. You just need to filter stuff out really quickly. And I think the key is being able to understand when it's helpful, but then times where we need to stop and slow down and try to bring a bit more balance.
Excellent. Great elaboration. Thank you. Rika, what would be some common biases that our viewers might be dealing with?
Well, there's quite a lot, but I think what we are probably all familiar with, especially in current times, but it's always been a thing, is like maybe confirmation bias, that we are more ready to hear things that confirm our beliefs and that we're more ready to disregard information that goes against what we already believe. And so that you can see the bias in that, right? Like it is literally a filter. I think Claire said filter of how we take in information and doesn't let us see how maybe the situation really is. And in this case, we prefer to be confirmed than be disconfirmed. Maybe another one, like I think I have that sometimes, like a curse of knowledge. Like I assume if I know something, then everyone else knows that as well. And then I under-explain, for example, because I assume this must be obvious if I know it. And that's also kind of a bias.
I think that curse of knowledge is a challenge for a lot of the professionals we work with who are providing the expertise, perhaps to decision makers, and can be a struggle to identify what the decision maker doesn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Claire, any other common biases you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I think there's so many. There's certainly the in-group bias, the confirmation bias. One that I know is a problem for myself is that hypothesis of a just world. And when I was reading about it, I recognized that's definitely me. I have this kind of instinct that if I do the right thing, then it'll all kind of balance out in the end. Yeah, critical thinking would probably not agree with that. It's a bit of a bias, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I guess for me, I've had to have a look at doing the right thing for its own sake, not because I think subconsciously it's all going to balance out one day. So I think we all, there's a lot all the time. It's how humans operate, really.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. I've got a nice question that's come through the chat about prejudice. That if everybody has bias, then is it really prejudice that's the issue and it turns into that?
I mean, it falls into the same category, right? Like prejudice is a bias. And I think, yes, we all come from tribal societies where it's better to be a bit doubtful about people from outside the group because you don't know them and you more trust your own group. And we, in a society like this, we need to handle that, right? Like, again, your bias, deal with it, right? Like this, you just need to be aware that you are and then find ways to handle it. And that makes us functioning humans in a very pluralistic society, I think.
Thanks for the Rika. So let's think about how this impacts our communication, because that's kind of the other half of what we're here for today. How do those biases affect the communication or perhaps the results of our communication? Claire, do you have any ideas?
I'm just thinking to that question from Howard about weaponizing bias. And I guess a lot of the time our bias is subconscious and people don't intend to use it for ill intent. But potentially as communicators, people instinctively leverage natural biases. So people often have a negativity bias. So we have easily amplified sense of fear. So in communications, that might mean different campaigns really try to leverage that and really, if this happens, then this is going to happen. It's going to be terrible. So I think we have, firstly, a responsibility to just understand how we're using that in our communication, but also recognize biases and mental shortcuts are a way that we can use to make it easier for our readers as well. For instance, they like things to be in odd numbers and humans are more comfortable when there's a nice sense of rhythm, sets of threes, and we can use those kind of biases to make commas that just feel easier to read and get our message across better.
It's a nice way for turning it into a positive. Rika, any thoughts about how those biases affect our communication or the result is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I might be affected by the curse of knowledge, assuming that everyone knows at least as much as I do. And that would really affect how much information I share. If I give instructions, like I don't include the details because I think they're obvious, then that can have real consequences, right? If I give someone instructions how to operate a machine and I assume half of it is obvious, that can go really wrong. And other biases, of course, like Claire said, I could also look to exploit in a way. Sometimes we speak of the halo effect, where we like things and we trust things more that also look good in other respects. We trust good-looking people more. But sometimes I say this in a writing workshop as well. Also pay attention to the layout. If your document that you're writing and sharing with someone looks really good and has lovely white space and it's just really good to look at, then you can use the halo effect. It looks good to also sell your information a little bit better.
Working on that first impression.
Yeah, I always say first impressions matter and first impressions last. Yeah. So yeah, use the halo effect.
Now, as you were saying it, Rika, I started to have this thought about the ethical element of using somebody else's biases to help get our points across. And actually, the same questions has come through from a participant. Like, where do we draw the line between using the bias positively and where it becomes manipulation? So it's a big question here.
Yeah, I'll jump into this, Grant, because it's such a fascinating area. And this is not a webinar about ethics and morality, but of course, it's something we are always thinking about. There is a lot of work around this. And I think I was just about to jump off my little stool and grab it from my bookshelf. There's some fantastic work on this, and especially around social marketing. So things like stopping people smoking, stopping drink driving. How much can you leverage that bias in your communications if your ends are good? And it's just a fascinating area. It's certainly not something we're all experts on, but I think people need to find their own position and feel what has integrity. But those questions do start to get a little bit gnarly, and things like, even say you've got a work lunch place, where do you position the fruit versus the chips when you know that fruit's going to be better? If you put it at eye level, people are more likely to choose it. So you're manipulating them for their own good. And I think that's a pretty dangerous situation. What do they say? The path to somewhere is paved in good intentions. So yeah, it's a really interesting question, far too big for this webinar, but I think it's something we, as communicators, especially us who are communicating to big, wide groups of people, our audiences deserve us to be asking those questions all the time.
Excellent. Yes, right. We talk about using the power of words for good. Any other thoughts, Rika, about drawing that line?
I mostly think the ethics come in where it depends on what you're selling, right? Like, I don't want to quote Spider-Man, but I will. Like, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I mean, that even comes in for us as writing trainers. Like, when we teach someone how to write really clearly, that will ease the cognitive load of your text. And then that will automatically be more persuasive, and then it depends on what you're persuading people of. Is it like a nefarious thing, or is it something positive, right? And so, yes, you can use anything for good or bad, right? And so it's up to you what ethics you have and what you're actually trying to persuade people of, I would say.
Nice. And I guess one thing you could add is, if we are lowering their cognitive load, then we are giving them the opportunity to think more critically about what we're seeing if they choose to. Yeah. So there is some empowering too.
Yeah, certainly. I seem to remember I think it was in my master's, one of the techniques in negotiation, it's a bit of a nefarious technique, is where you just dump a whole lot of information on the other party and actually give them too much that they can digest and get through. And that's what we can inadvertently be doing so often if we don't take the time to really structure and support our readers. So exactly, by understanding what shortcuts that make things easier to read, we're allowing them a little bit more cognitive space to bring some real critical thinking as well, not have to lean on those shortcuts so hard.
Yeah, in debating, that's called the Gish Gallop, right? Like, where you just run over someone with just argument after argument, so they have no way to reply, and then it looks like you've won the argument, but really you just didn't allow for any reply reasonably for any of the points you raised.
You may have lost that person's trust in the future anyway. Like, you may have won the argument but lost the future war, whatever it is to go there. A couple of questions that have come through, kind of bring them together. How can we really identify our biases? If they're quite ingrained, maybe they're intergenerational, or is there some kind of way, some kind of process that we could follow to actually make sure we're catching our biases along the way with it?
Should I give it a go? And then Claire, you'll jump in. I think the first thing is what we're doing here, right? Like, become aware of it. Without awareness, you can't do anything, right? You can't respond if you don't know what you're responding to. And I think that's always the key part. Then you can actually come into a habit of questioning yourself on really important decisions that have impact or risk attached to it. Maybe ask yourself, maybe apply like a Socratic method, right? Like Socrates always asked questions instead of giving answers, and ask yourself, what assumptions have led me to come to this conclusion? What do I mean by a certain term? Why do I think this is true? Or who am I excluding if I suggest this? What group is being served? So really start to question yourself before you fully accept something that maybe initially intuitively feels true to you.
See, asking lots of questions seems to be one of the keys to this. Claire, thoughts?
I'm just looking at that question. Certainly, the way that we see the world and our biases are shaped not just by our own experience, but through generations. There's no question the way that we're brought up is a result of how other generations are brought up, and that shapes everything. I think there is some research that says bias training doesn't really change your biases in itself, but I think it can make you aware. I personally think one of the best things to do is just by putting yourself in a position where you're coming up against different perspectives, different people, and really listening, not going to the extreme and thinking, well, I believe in this, so I'm going to go to the extreme, and not allowing yourself to think, yeah, I knew that wasn't true, but just getting in collective voices, getting into different spaces, really listening to other perspectives. And then, as Rika said, that self-awareness and reflection, and also going into that just in a really honest way. It's so easy to get a little bit of ego and get a little bit of defensive, especially when you realize something you've believed your whole life might be a bit one-sided. It's pretty rough personally, and I think you've got to go into that. And of course, I always come back to books because I love them. I know there's a great book by Dr. Carla Hokumo at the University of Auckland about biases. Specifically, it's set in a New Zealand context. It's just a tiny little penguin type book. So I'd recommend that too.
Thanks so much, Claire. And yeah, lots of great questions coming through in the chat. Sorry if we don't get through to them all. There are a couple about AI, and one of the questions is showing some awareness that AI might be including some bias in what it's producing for us. And another nice question that kind of attached to that is our bias going to become AI's bias, or is that something that's already happening? Rika, what do you think?
Well, I would say like AI is not smarter than we are because it's trained on our output. So yes, whatever biases we collectively as humanity have will be in the training data. So it will come out of the AI. And so I think you need to be actually a more critical thinker even with AI than just with interacting with other humans, because AI is so good at presenting really well and making things look good that you might be a bit more lulled into a sense of security and not having to check anything. So with AI, I would say you need to check assumptions. What hidden assumptions are underlying the answers it gives me to problems? What really subtle things go into this? Yeah, how does it define terms like in a contrast or in a problem? Is this really what I was aiming for? Yeah, and especially because you haven't inherently produced the text, then you haven't gone through the thinking process yourself. And so then checking it is much, much more important.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Rika. Leah, what are you thinking about this bias in dealings with AI?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I guess to train AI, there does need to be some associations inbuilt in it. So, for example, to train AI, you need to tell it what's the difference between a king and queen. But then by doing that, you're automatically building in the bias between this gender difference, and you're trying to retrospectively fix that. And we've seen some real floundering in the tools as people try to fix up bad biases in the AI, but also keep the good biases. And so that means that someone somewhere is having to make a moral judgment on what's good and bad. And if we look at where AI is coming from, it's a pretty specific group of people that are building all those tools, and then smaller voices, and particularly Indigenous voices or us here in New Zealand, that's not well represented in the development of those large language models. It doesn't mean it's not a useful tool, but I think we just need to keep it in context. And I guess one of my other hats I wear is a marketing hat, and that prompts me to bring another kind of critical thinking lens to AI and thinking, I'm sure that it's not being developed purely for the good of the world. There's definitely benefits, but just commercially as well, there's a commercial driver in behind it as well to keep it going. So we want to be able to interrogate that.
Can I just add one more thing? Because I really like the example of CVs and AI sorting out CVs and trying to hire someone who fits your company. And I liked Claire's point where bias can be really hidden and we can make real big efforts to get rid of them, but they are hiding in other places. For example, if you're trying to get rid of a gender bias when you're assessing CVs and you're like, please ignore the name and please ignore this, it could hide in very many other places like hobbies. Oh, person prefers baseball, which used to be a much more male connotated role. And then the AI might go, oh yeah, this fits the company very well because everyone here plays baseball, which would again probably hire a man. And so I'm just saying these things can hide in very different places from where we assumed they are.
Rika, yes, I think the thing we're realizing here is that we are always going to be dealing with some kind of bias. I don't think we'll end up being bias free, but it's being able to catch them as they pop up. That seems to be one of the things here. And again, so many great questions coming through. So it's a shame we only got a short amount of time to go through this. Final question to wrap up. What about when we've recognized that the person that we're writing to has clear biases, like our reader has clear biases in some way or the other? What's the best way to deal with it? Claire, any thoughts on that one?
It's quite a broad question. I'm trying to think of some examples of that. I know sometimes I've done writing that is coming from a specific lens, and I guess that's a bit of a personal question, making sure that even though it may not be your perspective, that it's a perspective you feel valid just for your own personal integrity. If you're writing for an audience that you know has a particular perspective that you're trying to move or persuade, generally, I think the evidence is pretty clear that if you attack someone just with a very contradictory thing, it doesn't open any doors. People just tend to go into defense mode and lean on confirmation bias, all of those kind of often quite fear-based biases to push back. So I think as a communicator, it's useful to bring some empathy into that, recognize their perspective and maybe try to bring them around and look at the different tools that you have available to you. But sometimes just a head first assault is not always productive. And in fact, I often think that teenagers are some of the best reveals of biases. They have great examples of everything, like slippery slope. You don't let me go out tonight. You're never going to let me go out ever again. And you just want me to be a hermit till I'm 50, like those types of things. Think about what's the best way around that. If you don't have the authority to just lock them at home, you've got to appeal to different things and really explain your case well.
Thanks. Yeah, one thing I learned from you is the importance of empathy in our critical process. You can't leave it aside. Rika, any other thoughts about dealing with that?
I just really want to agree with Claire on that one. If you know someone's bias, try to explore their bias, and then you can present your information much more and tailor towards what their needs are, right? And what their preferences are. And often that can land quite well. One bias is declinism, someone believing that the past has always been better and it's just downhill from here, and if you're trying to offer a change, they might be really resistant to that. And maybe you can then link it into with, look, how we used to do it, that's really good. And this is just a tweak. And this is actually picking up on something that worked well in the past. And so you can actually, if you're more aware of their biases, present the information better. And I think sometimes we're just also so focused on one aspect and we're becoming increasingly segregated into opinions when we actually have certain aspects in common, and then we could focus on those a lot more. There was an example I read recently where you can protect a nature area, but we don't because all the different groups disagree on different aspects, but you could get hunters and vegans and everyone on board if you could all agree we all want to protect this forest, So if you could find that point in there that clicks for them, then go for that. Yeah.
Yes, find that common thread. Where do their values meet with yours?
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, we're almost out of time, and it's been a huge pleasure to have you with us, Claire and Rika. I'd love a final word from each of you for our viewers. What would you like to leave them with? Claire?
I think Rika's last comment that she made about the vegans and the hunters, I felt a little bit seen as vegan, but I think that's exactly the point, is the more perspectives you're around, the easier it is to understand what people have in common. And at the end of the day, we have more in common than different. We just sometimes forget to focus on that a bit.
That's lovely. Well put, Claire. Rika, your final word?
maybe that I learn a lot from our participants in these workshops, and they always have really insightful things to say. And recently, just someone said a good critical thinker is someone who is open to be wrong. Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, like openness to just hearing a new perspective. And for that, you need to be clear that your bias might be filtering out that, and that you want to be aware and let it through, let the information through. And then maybe you can even change your mind.
Thank you so much, Rika and Claire, for your contributions today. So lovely to have you with us. Thank you for listening in on our Right Q&A on critical thinking. Hopefully you've got a few ideas now about how you might be able to work with your bias and improve your communication. And feel free to get in touch with us if there's anything else you'd like to know. Kia kite, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Kia ora.
Thank you, everyone.